So, hey everyone, welcome to our first AYA online webinar. We are excited that you have decided to join us today and hope that you find this time valuable because pretty sure folks have competing priorities and many things on their desks. So we're glad that you're here. This will not be the only webinar, as we hope to make this a series of live and pre-recorded content that highlights some dynamic friends, supporters, and colleagues in the areas of Texas Freedom Colonies, historic preservation, and conservation. So we hope that you'll continue to join us along this journey, resulting in being introduced to new information and expanding your network. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you our very first speaker for the AYA webinar series. Karen Martindale earned a BA in anthropology from Rice University in 2011, then an MA in anthropology from Texas A&M University's Nautical Archaeology program in 2015. While attending A&M, she took the opportunities to work at the Conservation Research Laboratory and participate in excavations in Sri Lanka and Savannah, Georgia as a conservator. From 2016 to 2018, she worked at the Queen Anne's Revenge Conservation Laboratory in North Carolina, conserving artifacts from Blackbeard's flagship. She returned to the Conservation Research Laboratory in 2018 to take a supervisory role. In addition to her responsibilities at the lab, she also serves on the board of the Texas Collections Emergency Resource Alliance, helping to educate professionals all over Texas on the best preservation and disaster mitigation practices for their collections. Today, Karen will discuss with us how to care for archaeological materials such as glass, ceramic, metals, and organics, fresh from a site or after disasters, the common signs of deterioration, and when to seek guidance from a conservator. Karen has provided handouts for this webinar, which you can find the link in the chat. So I'm going to drop that in the chat, and we also will be sending it out to all of our participants today. Okay, so there you go. That's in the chat. So if you want to look at the PDF handout that she has provided, that is there. And again, we'll send it out via email. So I'm going to go ahead and stop share and turn it over. I'm going to also spotlight Karen. Welcome, Karen, to the AYA webinar. And I'll take myself off and take it away.
Okay, can everyone see the slide? There we go. I see it on my preview. All right. All right, so thank you so much for inviting me to speak and for the introduction. Before I begin, I also want to say thank you to the Texas Historical Commission for letting me use photos of their artifacts for this talk. So when I was earning my bachelor's degree, I took part in a couple field schools, and I'm sure experiences vary. But during those seasons, we would excavate a unit, document the artifacts, wash and dry them, put them in a bag, store them in boxes, and then mostly not think about them ever again. I didn't really have a concept of how materials reacted to their burial environment or storage environment, and I didn't really think that was odd until I started my graduate degree and decided to focus on conservation. In underwater archaeology, where artifacts are retrieved from arguably the worst conditions they could be put in, it's considered irresponsible to not have a full conservation plan for your site, because the entire collection could simply degrade away without treatment. Over my last decade or so of working with artifacts from underwater and terrestrial sites, I've learned that there are definitely situations where artifacts from terrestrial sites fare far better than underwater. This is the majority of cases. But no site is completely free of complications, especially in areas prone to flooding, which does describe a large area of Texas. There we go. So the topic of care of archaeological collections is a big one, so this is only a very basic introduction. Today, I'll go over some of the general recommendations to consider for any artifacts removed from the ground, then go through 3 general types of materials. For each group, I'll discuss common types of degradation you may see straight from the ground or over time, how to prevent degradation, recommendations for salvage, and when to contact a conservator. The handout that I've included has some of the resources that I refer to fairly frequently, and I'm of course happy to answer questions and provide clarification at the end. So these recommendations are kind of self-contained thoughts that don't really fit anywhere else in the presentation, but are good to keep in mind as you prepare to excavate or are looking through your collection. If you're excavating a site, the more you know, the better prepared you can be for what condition the artifacts may be in and can help you prepare supplies. So for example, in dry climates like West Texas, metals and organics may be in better condition compared to the coast, where flooding causes artifacts to absorb moisture and dry out over and over again. Acidic conditions can remove paint and cause pitting in glass and ceramics over time. If you're excavating from a beach or brackish riverbank, you may come across conglomerations of concreted artifacts. And in terms of safety, it's always good to be aware of possible pollutants near or in the site. In the last couple of decades, our lab has worked on sites that have had possible mercury or fuel contamination from specific artifacts, and a site that had a possible benzene pollution issue from a nearby chemical plant. One of the first concepts I learned in conservation class was to keep wet things wet and dry things dry. If you're excavating from a land site, it's usually best to approach any kind of wet cleaning with caution. If you're excavating from a waterlogged site, drying artifacts without treatment can cause irreversible damage. So it's best to keep them wet or damp and consult with a conservator. Archaeological objects can be more fragile than they look, so make sure to handle them carefully. If they're big enough to handle with two hands, use two hands. Be sure not to hold any object by areas that can become weakened over time, such as handles. Always be careful of any parts that may come loose, such as with lids. And I've learned that if it can roll, it will. So always make sure to use some kind of support, pencil, wedge, anything to keep things in place before you walk away. What most artifacts have in common is that degradation is caused by a combination of moisture, oxygen, and salt. If you can eliminate or decrease at least one of these, you can prevent a lot of issues. So for example, one of the most common forms of degradation I see on a daily basis is rust or iron oxidation, which is caused by the iron reacting with moisture and oxygen. A nail kept in a closed container with silica gel and or oxygen scavengers will fare much better than a nail left to any storage environment. And no matter if you're removing artifacts during an excavation, cleaning, displaying, salvaging them, be sure to take lots of photos. It doesn't matter if they're taken with a cell phone or a fancy DSLR camera. Photos are one of the most important forms of documentation we have. It can track the appearance of the artifact over time, help match up pieces if it breaks or becomes separated from its label, and can be used for insurance claims. Also keep in mind that conservators and conservation labs don't just conserve artifacts. We also have access to analytical equipment, and many labs can provide services to analyze metals or organic residues, or possibly 3D scan artifacts, or even just recommend where you might get that done if that's something that interests you. These are just a couple very brief lists of cleaning and salvage supplies. They are in no way exhaustive. I've included a couple links in my last slide, as well as today's handout, which include much more comprehensive lists for salvage. But these would be the base supplies that you would want to have on hand for cleaning or salvage. So on to our first category of materials. Glass, ceramic, and stone are generally grouped together because they are three of the more stable artifact types in a site. And so they tend to survive when other artifacts may degrade more quickly. They react similarly to the environment, and they tend to be conserved with the same or very similar methods. For any of these materials, the most common type of damage we see is mechanical, breaking. These objects, these are objects that often see quite a bit of reuse during their use life and are usually thrown away because they've broken and then more breaks can happen after deposition. Manufacturing method, soil conditions, nearby artifacts, and time can affect the surface conditions. This will result in iridescence, pitting, flaking, or crizzling, which is the development of fine cracks. The surface damage is usually a function of a high or low soil pH, moisture, and salts or other minerals. You generally won't see pitting forming once an object is clean and stored in a good environment, but it is possible for things like flaking and crizzling to continue if your storage environment is a bit humid, as tiny particles of moisture and salts in the air can continue to work themselves into the object's surface. It's very common to see stains, particularly on ceramics, but stains can also develop on glass and stone, particularly in any cracks that they have. Stains are usually a result of the burial environment and nearby artifacts. We most commonly see dark organic stains and orange stains from rust, but occasionally green stains from copper may develop. Some stains, for example, dark stains in a pipe bowl, may be historic and not something that you want to be removed. And lastly, accretions, also known as incrustation or concretion, may develop on the surface. This is far more common in marine sites, but can happen to artifacts in terrestrial sites, particularly if artifacts are close to iron artifacts, as the corrosion of iron is generally what drives the formation of concretion. In my pictures up here, we have a couple examples of the top left, a broken stone artifact that has been repaired. On the right is a piece of broken ceramic with mostly just some grime in the crevices. The glass bottle stopper has a bit of iridescence, which is difficult to tell in the photo, but has displayed some flaking. And again, difficult to see in the photo, but also has some fine cracks. And then the bottle at the very bottom is one of the most concreted bottles I have ever seen from a land site. So in general, these materials will survive well once recovered from the ground, and many treatments are more aesthetic in nature than anything else. An iron stain may not be visually appealing, but it's unlikely to cause degradation. Before cleaning, you'll want to inspect the artifacts for any decorations or damage that could be further affected by handling and cleaning. And you'll want to note if there is any change while you're cleaning. For cleaning, you'll want to start by removing dry debris with brushes, wooden dowels, or other hand tools. If they require a deeper clean, most of these materials can be washed in water with light brushing. Before any wet cleaning, you'll want to first test an area to make sure there is nothing removed or damaged by the cleaning method. And this would apply to any material that you're attempting to wet clean. You always want to make sure the cleaning is not going to make the artifact worse. For the basic cleaning, I would recommend distilled or other demineralized water, just so that no minerals are left on the surface for you to have to clean up. Soap is generally not going to be harmful to the artifact, and there are actually soaps specifically for conservation that are available for anyone to buy. But any soap can leave behind residue, and again, leave behind potentially more for you to clean up later. If you want a deeper clean, you can use a cotton swab soaked with a water and ethanol solution. I usually go for just a 1-to-1 mix. You'll roll the cotton swab gently across the area that you want to clean to lift up the dirt. During wet cleaning, you'll want to be particularly cautious of any low-fired ceramics or porous stone, as these can hold in moisture and develop mold or potentially soften while you're wet cleaning. And you don't want to store the objects until they're completely dry, because these objects can develop mold. If you have fragments that fit together, it's up to your comfort level if you want to repair the object yourself or consult a conservator. If you decide to repair them yourself, you'll want to avoid any kind of water-soluble craft glue or any kind of super glue, as these can become brittle or yellow over time, or are either too easy to remove or very difficult to remove. Common glues used by conservators include polyvinyl acetate and acryloid B72. These are resins that are dissolved in acetone or ethanol, things like that. They tend to be fairly stable over time. They have good working times as you fit pieces together, and can be reversed by using the same solvent that made them. So they tend to be strong, but gentle on the artifact if you need to reverse the treatment. As long as they're relatively stable, glass, ceramic, and stone are fairly happy stored in most temperatures and in a fairly wide range of relative humidities. My general recommendation for these materials is that whatever storage conditions you choose, the most important thing is that they remain stable. Wide variations in temperature and humidity can cause problems down the road. It's also usually a good idea to provide some kind of support for glass or ceramic vessels. One of the links that I included in today's handout is called Stash. It's an online repository for various instructions on creating archival storage solutions for artifacts. I would say almost all of these solutions are also use very easy to access materials. So if you find yourself in the unfortunate situation of a disaster, such as a flood or fire, these materials are going to be among the easiest to work with. For either situation, you'll want to be careful of any pre-existing cracks or breaks, and take note of any new cracks or breaks that have developed. You'll also want to be careful of any applied decorations. Debris from flooding can be rinsed off with clean water. Again, demineralize is best, but whatever you have available is completely fine. If the object has broken or you suspect it might break during the salvage process, be sure to keep all the pieces together in one bag or container. After rinsing, the objects can be patted dry or air dried. In the event of a fire, the objects themselves will most likely not undergo any changes, as it requires higher temperatures than most fires can reach to chemically or physically change them. However, the same cannot be said for any materials that were used to repair them or any kind of applied decoration. There's also the problem of soot, which is composed of various nasty chemicals and tends to be very sticky. You don't want to wet clean soot off of any objects. That can just drive the soot further into any cracks that are present. So it's best to let any objects dry and clean them off with a soot sponge, brushes, and a HEPA vacuum with a screen attached to the nozzle to prevent any loose pieces that do get picked up from being sucked into the vacuum chamber. If you're dealing with this kind of situation on your own, I highly recommend wearing protective equipment. Nitrile gloves and a mask would be the minimum equipment. But honestly, you're probably going to want a full set of Tyvek coveralls, if not potentially a whole hazmat suit. Soot and ash is nasty. You'll want to contact a conservator if you're interested in more complex treatments, such as chemical removal of stains, redoing old repairs, stabilizing the surface layer of an object, or performing complex repairs. There are conservators that make their entire living out of repairing really large, complex vessels with hundreds of sherds to piece together, that do a fantastic job. Conservators will also generally be equipped to deal with soot and other kind of contaminants that you probably just don't want to have to deal with yourself. So metals are a mixed bag of problems and make up the bulk of materials my lab conserves in any given year. Keep in mind for all metals that over time, these artifacts will generally come into equilibrium with their environment, which may contain less oxygen that is in the air. It's not uncommon for some metals to look perfect coming straight from the ground, only to change color or become brittle after a month or even a year or years in storage. Um, I worked on an underwater project where we recovered a beautiful brass button that was practically shining gold in the sun, on site at least. When it was inventoried a couple months later, it had turned practically black, which we were partially able to reverse, but we never got that perfect gold color again. This isn't a complete list of the metals that you'll see or the types of degradation, but they tend to be the most common. So starting off with the most stable metals, gold and silver will generally keep their appearance in most conditions, though silver will tarnish. In my experience, except for coins and fine jewelry, it's rare to see a pure gold or silver object, at least in an archaeological context. I've seen much more silver plate than actual silver. The main issue with silver, with any kind of plating really, is that it does tend to flake off. So you'll want to be cautious when handling it or considering cleaning anything that might be plated. On the opposite end of the spectrum, iron is one of the most unstable and often unpredictable metals that we get in archaeology. Iron doesn't like being iron, so it very readily degrades in the presence of moisture and salts. Both of these are much bigger issues in the ocean, but even in a terrestrial site, soluble salts can work their way into the metal, and as it absorbs water and it dries, the salt crystals will expand and crack or split the metal. Iron itself can expand and contract imperceptibly as it gains and loses moisture. And eventually pieces will fall off or fall. Iron can also bond to the soil around it and form a hard shell of concretion, which is what you see in the upper picture on this slide. The concretion at first glance does tend to appear very solid, but because of the changing moisture levels in terrestrial sites, this shell can actually be very fragile and remove the surface of the iron with it. I've recently gone through an entire site of artifacts starting from the 70s, and almost all of the iron artifacts had a layer of concretion on it when they were recovered from the field. But by the time it had gotten to me, anywhere from 1 to 30 years later, or 1 to 60 years later, I should say, almost all of the concretion had come off in the bag. So it was just a loose bag of concretion and then a nail, perhaps. Oh. And these images are just to show the range of what you can see from an iron artifact, just depending on the manufacturing process itself, the soil conditions, what part of the site it was found in. There can be a lot of difference. These two hinges are from the same site, the San Jacinto Battleground. Corrosion in copper alloys is usually identified as bright green splotches, sometimes referred to as bronze disease. If the copper object is near another object, that object may also take on green stains. Like iron, this is a reaction of copper with moisture and salts. And as you can see from this artifact, looking at it from one side, it could be completely imperceptible, and then on the other side, practically covered in that corrosion, which can be particularly a problem with very thin artifacts such as this one. Tin, its alloys, including pewter, and modern metals like aluminum are relatively stable, but when they do corrode, it usually presents as white spots, pitting and bumps or pustules. The lower artifact in the slide presents a little bit of all of those. They can also become brittle, again, due to soluble salts getting into the metal and causing cracks, which you can see in both of these images. Lead is one of the more stable metals after gold and silver, but can develop a layer of lead carbonate or other kinds of oxidation on its surface, which often ends up being very powdery, which will mostly be obvious if it's in some kind of bag and the powder covers the interior of the bag to the point where you can't see the artifact anymore. Because lead is very soft, it can also be very easily scratched during its use life or during excavation. I do want to point out that while we generally think of corrosion as a bad thing, there are cases where corrosion is actually helpful to the artifact. Bronze statues are the best example of this. They're often left out in the elements, but can remain in good condition without any intervention for hundreds of years. That's because the initial layer of corrosion forms a passivating or protective layer. We'll also refer to this as a patina, which provides a protective layer from outside sources and can prevent further corrosion. It should be noted, though, that changes in an environment can affect that and begin the corrosion process again. So for metals, you'll want to focus on dry cleaning using, again, brushes, dowels, other hand tools. Wet cleaning can be performed by applying ethanol or a one-to-one mixture of ethanol and water with a cotton swab. The ethanol in that solution will help the water dry up fairly quickly. And again, you'll always want to test a small area before committing to cleaning the entire object. It's possible that if you have very minor corrosion spots on an object, that this and good storage conditions can largely mitigate the problem. Iron is the one metal that will almost always require further intervention. If you choose to clean lead, whether that is wet cleaning or dry cleaning, always be sure to handle it with gloves, latex or nitrile. And if the corrosion layer is dusty, I also highly recommend wearing a mask. Most metals are going to be fairly stable or at their most stable at a low relative humidity. If they're part of a composite object or are in good condition, they can be stored at a stable temperature with a humidity between 40 and 55 RH. Artifacts that are delicate or are displaying corrosion should be kept in a lower humidity. I usually do this with smaller objects by putting them in either plastic bags or other sealed containers with silica gel. Silica gel will usually bring the RH down to about 20. You can also use oxygen scavengers in smaller containers to lower the oxygen levels, which would also help prevent corrosion. In a salvage situation, metals will be a high to medium priority, right behind organics. While the metals themselves will hold up well in flooding and fire, corrosion may begin to form within hours, or it could be days or weeks after the event. It all depends on the condition of the artifact, how long it was in water, how dirty that water was. In the event of a flood, metals should be rinsed in clean water and air dried. If the surface is stable, you can also blot them dry. Again, most fires aren't going to reach a high enough heat to cause structural damage to the metals. But if there is an applied finish, and the finish could be historic, or conservators often apply sealants after conservation, or if you have repairs, those can definitely become damaged by the heat. You want to focus on dry cleaning with soot sponges, brushes, and HEPA vacuums, as again, wet cleaning can just drive soot further into objects and become more of a problem. You want to consult with a conservator if you note any signs of active corrosion. In most cases, corrosion can be slowed down with a good storage environment, but once it's started, it can be challenging to stop or reverse. If the artifact has a lot of concretion, such as this pocket knife in the top image, conservators will be more equipped to remove the concretion safely and deal with what's underneath, as a lot of times a lot of concretion can indicate that there is almost no actual metal left. Or if you're not sure if you want the artifact treated, conservators can at least take x-rays so you have a good idea of what is underneath the concretion, what condition the artifact is in. Metal and organic composites are some of the most challenging artifacts to deal with in conservation. So if you have a composite artifact where the materials are reacting with each other, that is a good reason to contact a conservator, whether for conservation or storage advice. And of course, if an object is fire damaged, covered in soot, or if there is suspected contamination, a conservator is going to be more readily equipped to deal with those issues safely. Specifically for metal conservation, but this could also apply to other artifacts. I advise you consider what you would like the aesthetic outcome to be and discuss that with a conservator. So for example, my lab has had a couple of clients who wanted their copper alloy artifacts to have that brown patina so that it looks dug and not shiny and brassy. That's something that we were able to accommodate, but it does limit treatment options, and we weren't really able to make any guarantees on appearance before the conservation started. Keep in mind that if the passivating layer is removed, the conservator will replace it with a sealant to protect the artifact. Conservator is not going to just leave the artifact exposed to the elements for long term. And then the last category, organics. I will touch a little bit on textiles and basketry, but what I generally work with as far as organics go is wood, leather, and bone. So all of these materials are going to be fairly sensitive to changes in the burial environment, particularly the introduction and removal of moisture. They'll swell with moisture, then shrink as they dry, which will weaken their cellular structure and can lead to brittleness, shrinkage, warping, cracking, flaking, all of those, both of the artifact itself, as well as any kind of applied finish, such as paint or varnish. And then in moist areas, organics may simply rot away. Organics can become stained, usually from proximity to iron or copper alloys. This toothbrush here, in addition to breaking, does have a little bit of iron staining on the handle. Organics with metal fasteners or other tightly attached metal components can develop breaks or cracks as a result of the metal corroding, such as this bone handle here that has an iron screw that has swelled over time and caused a crack. Like glass, ceramic, and stone, some stains may actually be historic in nature for organics as well. Most organics, especially wood, have the unfortunate downside of being tasty to a host of invertebrate and vertebrate pests, as well as mold. Some signs, such as holes and the presence of frass or the excrement from wood-boring pests, may not be obvious straight from the ground. If you do notice insects in or nearby the artifact during excavation, you may want to isolate it temporarily to confirm that no eggs were left inside of it. Once organics have undergone basic cleaning, keep an eye on them and take note of holes, frass, and changes in color that could indicate the presence of pests or mold and could be indications that they need to be isolated. Also keep in mind that organic materials were sometimes manufactured with hazardous materials, such as arsenic and mercury. If you have a long-held collection of artifacts, historic treatments may also cause major problems. And unfortunately, these treatments are often not documented anywhere. Objects may be treated with pesticides or covered in lacquer or given some kind of other treatment. And over time, these chemicals can continue to off-gas, and the fumes can start degradation processes in other materials that are in the same box or display case. So if you notice strange hazy patterns on that artifact or nearby artifacts, or if the tissue or other padding material that's in the box with the artifact starts to change color, this is an indication that there might be something else going on with the artifact. So like metals, if an organic artifact is already dry, you should try to limit yourself to dry cleaning with brushes, dowels, and other hand tools. Take notes of any cracks or places where the material flakes. And if present, just note that paint and other finishes may be very fragile. You can do some cleaning with ethanol or an ethanol water mix applied with a cotton swab. While this does help lift dirt from the surface and can help lighten some staining, any rough surfaces will often catch the surface, will often catch particles of the swab and may require extra cleaning again once it's dry. Additionally, using too much liquid can cause a surface to become brittle. And I would avoid wet cleaning near any surface decoration. This shoe sole was cleaned primarily with the methods that I listed. It came in with just a lot of surface debris that was brushed off primarily. Tougher areas were removed with a 1-to-1 ethanol and water mix with a cotton swab, but you can see that there are some white spots in both these pictures where bits of cotton came off. So I did have to go back and brush all of those areas off again. And then this is the finished product. This did come with the extra challenge of having so many nails in the heel, which is another problem entirely. But definitely looks much better with just some basic cleaning. If you notice mold or insect activity, you'll want to isolate the artifact in a sealed plastic bag or other sealed container. If you can, store it in a fridge or freezer until you're able to consult with the conservator. It's generally recommended to store organics in a relative humidity of 50 to 60. You can use silica gel to retain that humidity if you're in a particularly dry or very humid area. Straight out of the bag, silica gel will generally lower relative humidity to about 20, but it can be conditioned to higher levels to help you maintain a higher humidity. Organic artifacts are the highest priority for a salvage situation because they're the most likely to be affected and quickly. If there are any organic artifacts that are unstable or that you will not be able to get to within 48 hours, again, the freezer is your friend here. That will buy you time to work on other priority artifacts. Organics that have been through flooding can be rinsed in clean water. Some may just need extra attention as they dry. Semi-tanned leather and fur should be manipulated to keep them supple. If an organic object is supposed to stand, such as a piece of basketry that is not able to stand on its own when wet, you'll want to make sure to pat it and change out the absorbent material frequently. And for any organic material, you'll want to keep an eye on it, to just keep an eye out for mold that may develop and isolate those artifacts if they do develop mold. In a fire, organics are the most likely material to undergo any kind of detrimental changes, and they can really hold on to soot and ash in their crevices. Any artifacts that are folded, such as textile or closed, like with a lid, should not be unfolded or opened in order to prevent soot from traveling into clean areas. And again, you'll want to focus on dry cleaning here with brushes, soot sponges, and a HEPA vacuum. Consult with the conservator if the artifact is a composite and the materials are reacting badly with each other. This can show up on the organic material as cracking near the non-organic material or as staining. You may also see areas of accretion, especially near things like iron fasteners. I would recommend talking to a conservator if there is significant cracking, flaking, general brittleness of either the artifact or its decoration. And again, conservators are equipped to deal with mold, pest activity. They can help analyze artifacts for previous treatments that have become detrimental, can recommend testing for these artifacts, and are generally equipped to deal with any kind of contamination, whether that is from being in the ground, their manufacture, or what conservators of the past have done. These are some of the resources that were copied to the handout. The handout did get a few more. And I do just want to thank you for everyone that made this talk possible. And that is the end, and I am happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen,
You're
for
welcome.
this information, for taking the time to be with us today. And happy to take anyone's questions if you want to drop it in the chat or eventually come off mute. I did have just a couple of questions to get us started. So one of the first things you mentioned conservator quite a bit throughout your presentation. So for just the common person who may have been have experienced a flood or a fire in their home, how accessible are conservators in general, and specifically when it comes to like natural disasters?
So I will say in Texas right now, conservators are fairly accessible. The Texera, the Texas Collections Resource Alliance, we have a phone line and email that's monitored 24/7 by conservators if people do have questions. Nationwide, there's also the National Heritage Responders. They also have a phone line that people can call. Otherwise, AIC, the American Institute of Conservation, has a find a professional search function. I did include that on the handout today, where you can look up conservators in your area by their specialty. So for example, I'm an archaeological conservator. You do not want to call me if you have a book that needs some special attention. Just like you wouldn't want to go to a paintings conservator if you just dug up pieces of metal on a site. So you can look them up by location and specialty, which is nice. I will point out that if you're just dipping your toe into this field, you will see there's a slight difference between conservator and restorer. For a lot of disaster situations, you're going to see restoration companies, which are often, well, I will say they are generally fantastic at coming in if there is a fire situation, for example, in your home or in a historic building. They're going to be the ones probably even better equipped to make sure that your house is habitable, things like that. Or if you have large scale large-scale damage from a fire or flood. They're going to perform a lot of the same services. Um, Restoration, as far as smaller collections,
Mhm.
I usually think of it as restoration. You're restoring it in order for it to look new or potentially be used again. So you might restore a cast iron pan because you want to use your grandmother's cast iron pan yourself. A conservator, we think of our jobs as we want to preserve the information as is on an artifact, not necessarily with the intention of it being used again.
That's right.
So I would say we get asked very commonly at my lab because we do a lot of cannons.
Mm.
One of the most common questions we get is, "Oh, can you shoot that again?" For a conservator, I will jokingly respond, "Yes, you could shoot it again once, because I can't say that metal is going to be stable enough to shoot."
Mm.
Whereas a restorer might replace, I guess you couldn't technically replace parts of the cannon. It is one giant piece of metal.
Mhm.
A restorer might potentially replace parts of an object in order for it to be used again
Right.
or for it to look new. So there are slight changes. A conservator is more likely to keep signs of historic damage on the artifact because it tells part of the story, for
Mhm.
example.
Well, thank you for providing that distinction because I don't think people look, I definitely didn't know about the difference between conservator and restorers or yeah,
I
so
certainly
that's great.
didn't either when I was an undergrad in archaeology.
No, so appreciate that. We did have one follow-up question in the chat about the cost of a private conservator. So what's that average, if there is one?
So it very much depends on the size of the object, the complexity of the object. If you're doing a big collection.
Mhm.
So my lab, if we're conserving an entire ship,
Mhm.
so if we have folks here in Texas, the LaBelle shipwreck that is currently on display at the Bullock Museum in Austin, that was done by my lab. Um, I actually don't know the dollar amount, but that was well over 500,000 for the conservation of 1.6 million artifacts, including the ship itself.
Can I
I
say, Texera is free. Let's say if someone needs
oh
help.
oh yes, if you just need yeah, Texera is
Mhm.
free. If you just need pointers for how to take care of it yourself. If you're going forward with conservation, I would say we recently got a project that was 3 small metal objects, a button, a bullet, and then uh, uh, an aluminum cap. I think the bill for those 3 objects total, and this does include some analysis, so we did
Mhm.
XRF analysis on them as well, was a little under 500.
Okay.
You might have a musket, for example,
Mm.
depending on the state that it's in, could be 1,000 to 5,000. It very much depends on the object.
Okay. That's helpful. One other
But
question, and then
usually,
oh,
I will.
sorry.
Usually conservators, if someone sends images or is able to, if they're close enough, is able to bring the artifacts for assessment, they'll provide some kind of free
Mhm.
estimate. So you're not jumping in and having to pay a cost before you get an estimate.
Got it. Got it. Appreciate that. I have one last question, and then of course one to open it up to everyone else. Again, for the layperson, what's one of the first things you would suggest that someone do after a flood or a fire when working to preserve any artifacts?
Um, well, I would say what we would say with Texera is um, the impulse is to go in right away and get your hands on artifacts and get them cleaned up as soon as possible. I would say the most important thing as you're, I would say, re-entering the area whenever it's safe to do so, make sure to take lots and lots of photos before you go in. After that, I would, it's great if you have a list of art items, whether it's, again, a historic collection or your private collection. If you have a list of items and what they're made of, that's a good thing to have on hand to help you organize. Organize yourself and create your priority list before you're going in. And after that, I would focus on saying, I know I have these materials, and focus on organics need to go first because those will experience the most damage, followed by metals, and then your glass, stone, and ceramics. Other factors may move into that. I see Olivia raising her hand. I would say other factors may contribute to priorities, such as maybe you have a piece of ceramic and it might be not be as high priority, but it might be have sentimental value or the only one of that kind. So other factors may play into it as well. What were you going to say, Olivia?
You might consider writing a plan. I think if you have a plan to begin with, and there are there's a repository of all different types of plans, then you would know how to proceed. You'd have a list of people to call, a list of your artifacts that are important, and so on.
Yes, thank you, Olivia. It looks like Olivia and George, you all had a couple of questions that you put in the chat. Did you want to just come off mute and ask your question, and we can capture that on our recording? Maybe we'll start with Olivia.
Karen and I talked a little bit about this, but if I suspected that I had some buried artifacts, how would you proceed? Like if you, not necessarily in my backyard, but let's say in a cemetery or at a place where you know people lived.
I would say, well, I will say it's much easier if it's on your private land. I would say in either case, there are people out there that can help. Universities with archaeology departments may be able to provide a little bit of guidance, or even if you know for certain that an area was inhabited, maybe they'll be interested in doing a field school. I actually have a friend in North Carolina that lived in the oldest house in the county, and they invited people from the local university to do annual field schools there, which was helpful for them as well as the students. If it's not on your land, you'll want to reach out to any kind of state agency in Texas. That's the Texas Historical Commission, who have trained archaeologists, and will at least be able to brief you on any laws that might be involved. Those would be my go-to as far as excavation.
Great, thank you, Karen. I'm gonna go with George with his question that's in the chat, and then with Loretta.
Yes. So comment on the use of sodium sesquicarbonate, mixing of washing soda and baking powder. So we do actually use sodium sesquicarbonate in, I would say in my lab, specifically in the cleaning of marine copper-based artifacts. Just putting it through rinses to help neutralize the corrosion as well as wash out some of the salts. I don't particularly use it for land sites. I will often use a paste of baking soda and ethanol to help polish some metal artifacts. It's a very nice non-abrasive polish. It's a great first step if you think an artifact just needs some polishing.
Right, thank you for that.
If there's anything more specific that you wanted to know about that, let me know. So.
Right, and Loretta, you had a question?
Yeah, I think it was answered in one of the other comments that you've already made. It was about just being just a normal everyday person, that you what I think of as being artifacts may not be what is commonly considered artifacts. Artifacts to me may be, pictures from,
Yeah.
20 years ago versus, something that was buried or something like that. And so when you were talking about having a plan, because most people, when you're just an everyday person living and you have a flood, you don't remember anything until you start going through it. So the idea about having a plan was a good idea. And then I also wanted to say I was a commissioner when the labelle was found. So I remember us buying all that. What's it called, peat or something, whatever the liquid was that the ship was
Polyethylene glycol.
yeah, that
Yeah.
we were
That.
buying thousands and thousands of dollars of that stuff. So, but it
Great.
turned out well.
Yep. And
Well-
that project helped us get the largest freeze dryer in Texas,
Right, exactly.
or at least the largest freeze dryer, I think, in the Western Hemisphere. I think
Right. I was going to say, was it only Texas?
Yes.
Wow. Wow. Well, we are at
Great
time,
resource.
everyone.
Sorry, go ahead.
We're at time, y'all. So I want to thank you again for joining us and just taking the time to be with us. And we look forward to you joining us in the future. And again, stay tuned to your emails. We will have a brief survey. Don't forget that the 2024 IS Symposium is on Saturday, June 8th, and more information will be coming out about that. We want to thank you again, Karen Martindale, for joining us and kicking us off on this webinar series. And we hope that everyone has a wonderful day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.